now. So, good evening, everybody, and welcome to St. George's Talks. For the first time in a while, we are online only. During the pandemic, of course, 2020, we were online exclusively. So it's like a bit of nostalgia in a way, seeing you all on screen. It's best if everybody mutes, and actually, I see most people have done that anyway, because, well, I suppose we're more used to Zooming now, and we know that it can be annoying if there are sounds coming out from elsewhere. The video is up to you. I'll mention that St. George's Church is a Grade 2 listed building in Whitechapel in the East End part of London. It was built in 1762 by German Lutherans who made a living in the East End sugar factories. Our guest tonight has given his entire working life to German culture as a teacher both in schools and colleges, the University of Liverpool and Open University, and as translator of both literary and commercial texts. He Englished Willy Brandt's acceptance speech before the Nobel Prize Committee in 1971 and the official literature the next year for the Munich Games. In recent years, he's been a guide in Germany, so there's no one better placed to talk to us about this subject this evening, the relationship of John Wesley, father of Methodism, to Martin Luther and the Lutheran Church. So, without further ado, will you welcome, please, everybody, Dr. Keith Hamnett.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for showing your interest. I hope you find the next period of time worth your participation. I've long been fascinated with the life and work of John Wesley, but really I question on a personal level whether I'd ever choose to spend very much time in his company. He appears to have been utterly egocentric, obsessed with his own feelings. His ideas and activities, however, repay 100-fold our attention and our consideration. However, before I start, I would like to make it clear that I'm not a historian or a theologian. In fact, I'm a linguist, a teacher, a translator, and an interpreter. And it's from this point of view that I approach this evening's topic. The myriad students of the life and work of John Wesley will be aware of his great facility with foreign languages. It's believed that he could communicate to some extent in or make use of no fewer than 9 languages. That's English, French, German, Italian, Spanish, Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic. I would say that the first 5 of those would be most useful in his work, but in the case of the last 4 of those, that's Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic, they would come in handy with his academic study and pursuit of greater knowledge. Now, facility with lots of languages sounds wonderful, but doesn't necessarily reflect reality every time. I've so often been invited to meet, Uncle Freds who are fluent in umpteen languages, only to find that they do have an acquaintance with, but not particularly a fluency in some of these languages. Now, the why part of my study is fairly simple. In 1735, Wesley sailed in a vessel called the Simmonds to do missionary work in the new American colony of Georgia. He was invited to do so, along with his brother Charles, by Governor James Edward Oglethorpe, a prominent member of Parliament. Oglethorpe had been given a 21-year lease on the territory and a payment of £10,000 to create both a destination for unresolved debtors and a barrier against encroaching Spanish, and that means Catholic, influence in the region. The new colony was described by the government as being in trust for the poor. Wesley's task would be to convert the heathen natives into Christians. Also on board the Simmonds were some 20-odd Moravian Christians with whom Wesley was keen not only to communicate, but also to discuss elements of the faith. It soon became clear to him that they were unable to participate meaningfully in the regular hymn singing and prayers, which were conducted exclusively in English. Wesley therefore set about learning the language with which he could then bring the Moravians into his fold. As with all of Wesley's activities, this was entered into with massive commitment. And even with his huge involvement in his own work and study, he still made it his business to devote up to, and sometimes even more than 3 hours every morning from 9 o'clock to noon, to learning German. Bear in mind also that Wesley's day usually started around 3:30 a.m. with prayers and Bible study. Wesley was also deeply interested and impressed by the Moravians themselves, in particular with their calmness under pressure. During the voyage across to America, a tumultuous storm arose and there was real danger that the vessel would be overwhelmed. Amidst the panic which grew around them, the Moravians, and we're talking here about men, women, and children alike, remained utterly calm and without fear. They were wholly unafraid to die if that was what God's will was for them. The how of Wesleyan German is what I found especially fascinating as a teacher. In the nearly 3 centuries since Wesley began his quest for fluency in German, methods of teaching and learning languages have evolved considerably. Long gone are the days of rote learning, listen and repeat, read and translate, grammar as an intellectual training regime, and the brutal sometimes enforcement of learning, accompanied often by physical and mental bullying. My own induction was via what might be familiar to perhaps a few survivors of the Deutsches Leben or Lingophone courses. One worked through chapters 1 to 20 and eventually managed to render The Old Soldier Rode a Black Horse in passable German. Some years ago, I was fascinated to observe the ex-Liverpool centre-forward, Kevin Keegan, participate in post-match television interviews barely weeks after joining SV Hamburg in the Bundesliga. And he did that in German. Now, I'm not talking about flawless, grammatically perfect German, but a German which clearly transmitted his thoughts on the way the game had played out. He'd reached this stage by listening to his teammates and other Germans he met and trying to join in their conversations. He apparently also listened to lots of German pop music, including Germanized versions of English and American hit records, including, for instance, the Beatles' Komm, gib mir deine Hand and Sie liebt dich, ja, ja, ja. As a teacher of pupils between the ages of 3 and 83, I found that learners latched on fairly quickly to the lyrics of pop songs. The more repetitive, the better. Consequently, it's very likely that the Moravians would pick up the words of some of the hymns they heard on a daily basis. It's also probable that Wesley would learn from the hymns sung by the Moravians, and he reinforced his theoretical study of the language by trying to get involved in their conversations. After all, this latter was the reason why he was learning the language in the first place. Such was the depth of his interest in learning languages that he actually compiled grammar books in 5 of the language in which he communicated. Apparently, one Sunday morning in Savannah, Georgia, he read morning prayers in English, German, French, Spanish, and Italian for the various language groups living in the area. Having arrived in Georgia at the beginning of February 1735, Wesley very soon found that he was not the saviour arriving in shining armour to redeem the souls of the ignorant natives. For a start, Governor Oglethorpe had other plans for him. He was to act as parish priest to the new settlers, leaving him no time for his missionary work. He was also required to set up his own living arrangements, but was given no material help to do so. In fact, he was treated with very scant respect. His parishioners objected vocally to his sermons, which they found, they said, bewildering, and he was barred from baptizing children because of his attitude to dissenters. However, on a more positive note, Wesley made the acquaintance of the leader of the Moravian community already living there. He was August Gottlieb Spangenberg, with whom he had long and profound discussions. But he was eager to begin his real work, bringing his version of the Christian message to as many people as possible. Again, language presented occasional barriers, but he was not prepared to be deterred. I began learning Spanish, he said, in order to converse with my Jewish parishioners from Portugal. On another occasion, he was in Frederica, where he found that some German speakers could not take part in the worship he was organizing. So he told them to come to his house, where he sang a German hymn with them and read a chapter in the New Testament, and, he said, explained it to them as well as I could. Wesley's mission in Georgia ended in December 1737, after 1 year and 9 months, which he summed up as follows: I've preached the gospel not as I ought, but as I was able. Now, this is not the occasion on which to discuss the sentiments behind this statement. Suffice to say, he did cause himself quite enormous problems because of his relationship with young women. Professionally, though sometimes faced with opposition, Wesley certainly worked extremely hard on what he saw as his mission. For instance, whilst in Charleston in 1736, he published a small volume of hymns, including 5 of his own translations of German hymns. This volume was entitled A Collection of Psalms and Hymns, Charlestown, printed by Louis Timothy. On a personal level, however, his relationships were not the most successful element of his time in Georgia. Once he got back home to England, he simply closed the page on that chapter of his life and began to plan his next project, to build on the contacts he had made with the Moravians, and he would do that by visiting Herrnhut, their community near Dresden in Saxony. This is where his study of German would be really most useful. On seeking his mother's blessing for this project, he was disappointed, but not deterred by her opposition to it. She described it as extravagant and enthusiastic. Now, his first move was to contact the patron of the community on whose estate the Moravians had been invited in 1722 to settle down after their flight from persecution. Amazingly, the letter which Wesley sent to Count Nicolaus Ludwig von Zinzendorf was written in Latin, Salutem in Christo sempiternam. In it, he tells the Count about a hymn which is heard sung by his brothers in Savannah, amongst whom he really wanted to be included. Not long after arriving back in England, Wesley began to prepare for a visit to Herrnhut, and that word translates approximately as protection of the Lord. And he wanted to do this in order to see for himself how the Moravian Christians lived and worshipped. So, on Wednesday, the 14th of June, 1738, Wesley set sail with 8 Englishmen and 3 Germans. They sailed to Amsterdam, and from there they travelled overland to Cologne, which he described as the ugliest, dirtiest city I ever yet saw with my eyes. That would endear him to the locals, I suppose. Whilst he was there, a zealous Catholic called out, "Knock down those Lutheran dogs." But some reformed papists pulled off their hats and prayed that we had a prosperous journey. Progress on horseback was slow, but on occasions they travelled by coach. From Cologne, they went down south to Mainz and Frankfurt, then northeast to Marienborn, where Wesley met Count Zinzendorf and apparently stayed longer than they intended. He then journeyed through Eisenach, which he described as unhandsome, and Erfurt to Weimar, where they were detained at the gate and asked for the Duke why they were headed for Herrnhut. Wesley replied, "To see the place where the Christians live." In Jena, they noticed that students differed from local citizens by virtue of the swords that they carried. In Halle, they saw an orphanage housing 650 children, where 3,000 children were taught. It was, he said, clean. After noting the gaudiness and finery of Meissen, they arrived in Dresden, where they were received with impertinent solemnity by magistrates, a senseless, inhuman usage of strangers. Worse, they could not procure lodging in the area, for they didn't like our looks. Finally, on Tuesday, the 1st of July, the group arrived at Herrnhut to be greeted by Johann Christian Adolf von Herrnsburg, whom Wesley had met in Georgia. Immediately, Wesley began to record his observations. Public services began with music on instruments and organ, then singing, expounding, more singing, prayers, and a third hymn. Every day at 11 o'clock, there was a Bible conference to discuss a portion of Scripture. At a service in nearby Bertelsdorf, it was noted that the congregation remained seated for hymns. There was a sermon lasting 1.5 hours on the subject of reconciliation. Wesley was so impressed that he wrote it down from memory when he got home. Wesley spent hours in discussion with members of the Herrnhut community, learning about their structure of officers, classes, and bands. In conversation with Minister Schneider and Mr. Manicius, he also discovered that there was a great deal of hostility from local Lutherans and Papists. For instance, nobody dares go to Herrnhut except by stealth, and nobody from Herrnhut would visit them. For 2 weeks, Wesley diligently studied the ways in which this community lived and worked and worshipped. He learned their hymns and prayers and began to put his knowledge of German to use in translating them. However, he was not received as a celebrity, far from it. For a start, he was expected to share the work of the community, such as gardening and fruit production in the gardens which you can see on the screen there. On one occasion, he requested a change of clothes, but was told, "No, you must be simple." Also, he was not allowed to take part in Holy Communion, simply because his many questions showed him to be unconvinced. Once he got hold of an idea and a subject, he would not let it go, perhaps the crude description of that would be he was like a dog with a bone. He worried at the subject all the time until he got his own version of an answer to it. On Wednesday, the 17th of July, Wesley set off for home, having learned much and attempted to impress many. The responses he experienced were not always that positive. His constant questioning of his own striving for redemption led some to describing as perturbed. He set off and travelled via Leipzig, where they were kept only an hour at the gate, then Halle, Jena and Frankfurt until they reached Mainz. There, after haggling, they agreed with the boatman a charge of 1 florin per person to sail up the Rhine to Cologne. A florin in modern money, I'm assured, is about 10 to 12 pounds. On the 30th of September, Wesley visited the Große St. Martinskirche, which he described as a huge heap of irregular buildings full of altars adorned with or loaded with an abundance of gold and silver. Pinned to the door, he noticed a sheet of paper. This was an Ablass, or an indulgence, indicating that priests may, on payment, deliver a soul from the fires of hell. I recall speaking to somebody in Dresden who told me of a local nobleman who had purchased for himself 1,730 years of freedom from the fires of hell. So he's still sitting quite comfortably. Wesley's reaction to this was scathing. Now, I dare and desire you to know whether any Romanist of common sense can either defend or approve of this practice. Now, this, you may recall, was one of the complaints about the practices of the clergy which featured in Martin Luther's 95 Theses, the basis of his demand that the church be reformed. Once back in England, Wesley began to use his skill in German to translate some of the hymns with which he'd become familiar on his travels. Altogether, Wesley translated about 30 hymns from German into English. Interesting, though, is that his total output of hymns was almost 500, compared with his brother Charles's 6,500. There's only one in the what is by far the best-selling, biggest-selling hymn book in England, the Complete Anglican Hymns Old and New. Again, compare this with the fact that Charles has got 23 entries in that book. Wesley's is number 576, Put Thou Thy Trust in God, described as a translation from the original written by Paul Gerhardt in the previous century. It is at this point that doubts begin to emerge in my mind. Are Wesley's translations really what we're told they are? What should we expect? Now, I would venture to suggest that a translation is a version in one language of what someone has written in another. We should therefore be able to expect that what we read, or in the case of him, sing, is a faithful reproduction of what the original writer intended us to sing. So when we sing, Now Thank We All Our God, we're singing what Martin Rinckart intended when he wrote, Nun danket alle Gott. And when Joachim Neander wrote, Denke daran, was der Allmächtige kann, he would be pleased to hear us nowadays singing, Ponder anew what the Almighty can do. Now, I've got no intentions whatsoever of playing judge and jury and forensically dissecting Wesley's translations in order to expose some terrible errors or willful misrepresentations. In fact, having studied them from my point of view as an experienced linguist, there's very little I would quarrel with. What I have found, however, is that in the vast majority of cases, John Wesley has taken the sense, the intention, the theology of the German hymns and rendered them in his own words. In his own words. In order to establish a baseline, I've studied the other hymns of German origin contained in the above-mentioned hymn book, and find that in most cases the words we're invited to sing are a reasonably faithful rendition of the writer's own intentions. Wir pflügen und wir streuen, we plough the fields and scatter. When I come to look closely at John Wesley's translation of Put Thou Thy Trust in God, I was not overly surprised to see that when it was published in the Mitre hymn book in 1836, it was described not as a translation, but as a paraphrase of Gerhardt's hymn. For a start, Wesley's hymn encompasses 6 verses, each of 4 lines. Gerhardt's original hymn comprises 12 versions, each of 8 lines. Now just do the sums there. And that, to my mind, indicates a quite significant compression. This would be much less significant if the substance of each version was the same. Actually, Wesley does little more than provide an approximate summary of the gist of Gerhardt's hymn. The only piece of actual translation I can find does not appear until verse 1 is finished, and verse 2 begins with what is the basis of Wesley's title. Dem Herrn musst du trauen. Thou shalt trust the Lord, which is the same as put thou thy trust in God. There's a detailed analysis of Wesley's translations by James Taft Hatfield, who used his students much in the same way as the great master artists used assistants to do the more mundane sections of their masterpieces. On Taft Hatfield's instruction, his students scoured the original German for examples to support his commentaries. They came up with only one real error. Entdeck, to reveal, was rendered as hide. What Hatfield found, and what I can confirm, is that Wesley abridged, compressed, edited, censored, paraphrased, and was often guilty of infelicity. He didn't stick entirely to the sense of the original hymn. What I would claim in summary is that Wesley introduced us to some German hymn writers, but did not really tell anything like the whole story of their work. In any case, such was the immense breadth and eclectic nature of his interests, he relatively quickly not only lost contact with the Moravians, but also from about 1740, his involvement in the German language. This in itself is not surprising, because when Wesley became interested in something, it took over his whole life. If, however, he lost interest, he simply dropped what he was doing and moved on to pastures new. Finally, if you found interesting this story and would like to learn more, I would recommend, from what is almost a whole library full of works on the subject, just 3. There's a very readable biography by Roy Hattersley, the former government minister, called A Brand from the Burning. That's a reference to the fact that as a child, Wesley was rescued from a burning house. Then there are Wesley's diaries, and there's Wesley's journal. The difference between these last 2 is important. The diaries are a record of what went on from day to day. The journal is more a collection of thoughts and opinions on what actually happened. So that's John Wesley and the story of just a part of his enormous contribution to religious life. I believe he merits the accolade of great, if only because he made the world sit up and take notice of what he considered to be the problems of the established church and his solutions to those problems. I said at the beginning of my talk that I would not regard him as a particularly good company. It's clear that I've not been alone in this view. None would question that John loved his younger brother Charles. However, he could be somewhat blunt in his comments. He once told Charles to rewrite a hymn because he deemed it to be too nimby-pamby. Wesley did get married, but his wife described their relationship as a living hell. It wasn't merely that he spent such an inordinate amount of time away from home. It was also his constant striving for the attention and affection of so many young ladies. In the end, after 15 years, which were unhappy, his wife Mary left him for good, having several times previously done so, and then she's relented and gone back. When Wesley preached the importance of the Ten Commandments, he was massively forceful and convincing. When he frequently broke at least one of them, he was equally deeply engaged. In short, he was a man who did what he could, but not always what he ought. Thank you very much.
And thank you.
Talk, if I may just add,
Yes.
in preparing this talk, there were some technical problems, and it's thanks to Rick Jones for his help and patience in at least solving those problems. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hamnett, for that most engaging and enlightening talk. I had lots I didn't know. I had no idea he'd gone to Georgia, America. Interesting that you said it was a place for unresolved debtors. Does that mean that it was a penal colony?
No, it wasn't. He took a very strong interest in the life of prisoners in the prisons, the debtors' prisons in London.
Yeah.
And was frustrated by the fact that if you take somebody who has a debt, you don't then separate them from the means of paying it back. So something needed to be done to sort of help those people, but also to remove them from what you might describe as decent society. So they were transported basically, and it was to be his job. When he got there, he thought he was going to be a missionary to convert the Native Americans.
Yeah.
But in fact, he was kept from doing that because he was told, no, you are the rector, the village priest for these for these settlers, and you conduct services, and you're their pastoral help.
Yeah, I see. So if you go into debt, you might be encouraged to go to Georgia from this country. Was that how it worked? So when you're an unresolved debtor,
you've got a choice. You can either stay in prison where you've got no chance of paying your debt back because you're not earning anything, you're not doing anything to make any money, or you can have a new life, start again, be reformed, and therefore perhaps even redeemed.
Yes. So did they pay your passage for you? Was it a free?
They were
one-way trip.
They were sort of paid for. They were paid for to go. Yes.
I see. No, well, that's a fascinating lecture. Anyone like to ask questions, please do. Let's see if there are any in the chat. There are three things down there. If you unmute yourself and ask a question if you wish.
I have a question for you.
Imo.
I read the Losungen each day, the word of the day from the Brüdergemeine.
Yes.
And they often remind us of, Graf von Zinzendorf's birthday. And I wasn't aware that Wesley had actually conversed with him directly, but he was very much the sponsor of the Moravian revival in Germany in the 18th century. So can you tell us anything more about him?
I don't know much about Zinzendorf, but he was a major figure in the whole story because he, as you say, he created the conditions for the we might call the refugee, religiously persecuted Moravians who came from all around. You maybe saw my map earlier, seeing that Moravia, as it doesn't exist nowadays, but it covered territory around the eastern part of Germany, Bohemia, Silesia, even Transylvania was in the area. So people who were converted to Lutheranism or who wanted to follow Lutheranism were persecuted by the Catholic majority there, and they got their place of refuge thanks to Zinzendorf. But I haven't followed my study of this particular topic along those lines.
Thank you.
Good. Peter Forsaith has some other suggestions for reading, also about Savannah. You have to unmute yourself, please, Peter.
I did, and then it muted again.
That's it.
Good evening.
Savannah, good evening. Sorry, thank you. Savannah was John Wesley went to Savannah as the chaplain. He had his sort of under his sort of second idea was he would convert the natives. Of course, that didn't happen. So yes, I mean, my suggestion. Can I say? I mean, I was slightly involved with Roy Hassels's book, and I question your recommendation.
Excellent.
I would suggest the best Dick Heitzenrater, Richard P. Heitzenrater's Wesley and the People Called Methodists is probably the best compact one.
That's an interesting title, because the hymn book which Wesley produced in this country was called For People Who Call Themselves Methodists.
Yes, the 1780 hymn book.
Yes.
He had to like the term Methodist, but he had to accept it. The other thing is, if you want to really, I mean, this is the standard biography. Henry Rack's Reasonable Enthusiast. It's a heavy academic work, but that I think is the biography.
Yes. If anybody is really interested in the subject, most of Wesley's papers are held at the John Rylands Library in Manchester, which is now part of Manchester University, and they have a catalogue, and you can either do it online or you can contact the library, and you can get access to a whole amount of literature on the subject. I spent several days there working in their reading room.
Not the catalogue to navigate. But yes, the other book I hastily recommend is my own book on. I'm probably the expert on images of John Wesley.
Well, I'm absolutely delighted to meet you. Thank you very much. This is being recorded, I believe, so I'll be able to see the titles of those books when.
But perhaps you could also, Peter, put them in the chat. Could you write down the titles?
Will do. Yep.
Yes, and the
Thank
author.
you very much indeed. I'm very pleased to meet you.
Yeah. So the term Methodism that Wesley didn't really like, I always understood it to mean that he and his brother applied as had a methodological approach to the practice of religion, in the same way that monks in medieval times would regulate their day, and therefore a method. How are we to interpret the term Methodism?
You wouldn't know the amount of debate has been. I'm getting there.
Peter, is that Peter speaking?
Yes,
Yeah.
it sounded.
The amount of debate there has been on the where they got the word Methodist from. The word Methodist was among many, a number of different nicknames given to the little group in Oxford.
Yes.
My money is on it being a resurrection of a name that was given to some fairly high church group of the later part of the 17th century, sort of.
The main impression I got of Wesley himself was that he was anything but methodical. He constantly changed his stance on all sorts of issues, and therefore it didn't sound very methodical to me.
Yeah. But his day, getting up at 3:30 a.m., that suggests somebody who's got a kind of, strict timetable that they adhere to, and his studies of German every day, 3 hours. It does sound quite monkish.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
If I may be allowed another question.
Yes, Emma.
If you could put that slide back up again, which showed the Herrnhut community.
Yes.
I was puzzled by the presence of palm trees.
Oh, yes, that was a good question.
Well, that is that's Herrnhut in the 21st century. That's a recent picture. It's the clearest I could find.
Is that can you see that now? Am I sharing?
That's an original one. That one is an old one, but it's a black and white.
Yes.
And I'm not sure that it's a palm tree, or is it a palm tree?
Well, there's lots of them, I think.
A lot of them. And it looks very isolated.
Yeah.
It looks very isolated.
I think that's a creative representation.
Fantasy.
Yeah. I don't think it looked like that. And no, I don't think so. No.
Well, the other picture.
This was actually a painting of somewhere abroad. You see, somewhere in the tropics.
Well, it looks like, the other picture that you supplied me with, which I didn't show, there's that one. Is that the same building? Is the one in the?
Oh, this one.
That's the modern one.
That's the one. But then also, this is a modern picture of. That's the Herrnhuter Gemeinde now. Gemeinde.
That's now.
Yeah.
The one you're on the screen is now. The previous one is, as I say, it's almost a drawing. I don't think it's a faithful reproduction of what it actually looked like.
But is that trying to be the same building?
Gardens. Yes, I would think so. From a different angle, perhaps the rear of it. I'm not sure.
It doesn't have the three windows.
If it's the same building, it's obviously been built upon, wings added and so forth.
Yeah. So where is the Herrnhuter Gemeinde? Is it
near? It's near. It's about 20 miles east of, or 20 kilometers east of Dresden.
And is it as isolated as that hilltop venue suggests?
No, not nowadays. It's fairly built up. It's not a very big community. I don't know what the population is, but it's a small town.
Is it on the top of a hill?
Yes. Well,
it is on a hill like that.
The topography I'm not sure of, but I don't think it looks like that.
No.
I've got an old picture, and there it seems to be in very hilly country.
I see.
And fairly isolated, because there seem to be the kind of village or small town and not much around You know,
Yes.
you have to kind of walk quite a while until you seem to hit something else.
Yes.
That's what it looks like in this old picture that I found.
Well, that could be what we're seeing
And there's
there.
definitely a big hill behind it.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've got that. And there does seem to be a little community but beyond the big building, a little village there. Ah,
Hamlet, I would have said. Not
A
much more
hamlet.
than a hamlet.
Yes, a hamlet and a hamnet. We're very Shakespearean this evening.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
About 20 houses is on this picture here, without
Yeah.
counting every one of them, but
There are
roughly.
Yeah.
fewer houses than palm trees.
You were these were this is the map that you gave me
Yes, that's
to
right. Yes,
put up.
but
You didn't you did refer to a lot of these pictures, but we didn't have it up when you were going through.
sorry, but if you look now, you can see there's Silesia, Bohemia,
Yeah.
Transylvania,
Yeah.
and in modern terms, that selection of regions is imposed on a modern map of Germany and a modern map of Europe, because you've got part of south
Yes.
of Poland, the east of Germany, part of
Yeah.
Austria, Switzerland, I should say. No, Austria, yes.
Yes.
Oh, it goes
Hungary.
Hungary is
Hungary is-
Pannonia, is it? That's
Yeah.
yeah.
Hungary, Slovakia, bits of Poland,
yeah.
Yes.
Czechia, bits of
particularly.
Germany.
Yeah.
And Herrenhut would be roughly where the A is in Lusatia.
In Lusatia.
Yeah, well, however you pronounce it.
Yeah.
But it's the second, the last A is
Yeah.
is the nearest I can do it from a map which doesn't show me the cities.
And how is it that the Moravians became so prominent and influential?
Presumably because of the kindness and religious openness of Zinzendorf, who
Yeah.
gave them somewhere
Who was
to
their leader?
settle.
Yeah. And that's what inspired Wesley first to learn the German language.
On meeting those people and being unable to converse with them, being unable to understand what they were, their form of worship,
Yes.
and seeing in them a target for conversion. But at the same time, he realized that they were just as Christian as he was, but just different. And that then became part of his interest in language, became another thing which caused him to study languages, because he had a lifelong interest in languages.
Yeah. Good. Now, any other questions? Well, yes, Imo?
I think Zinzendorf did come to live in London, in Chelsea. Certainly at the far west end of the King's Road is God's Acre, which is the Moravian cemetery. It's very, very moving.
Okay, that's
There
very
are
interesting.
Moravian churches all over this country. There's one certainly one in Yorkshire, in I think it's Halifax, because when I was talking to my son-in-law who comes from Halifax, and he said basically, well, you know, what are you doing tonight, sort of thing. And when I mentioned Moravian, there's a Moravian church near where I used to live. I didn't realize there was this connection, because of course Wesley traveled, or the Wesleys traveled very widely in the north of England, particularly in Yorkshire, Lancashire.
Yeah.
And very often on horseback.
It's full next just near Pudsey, and then there's oh gosh, what's the name of the one on the eastern side of Manchester? Wythenshawe, is it?
Wythenshawe, yes. It's where I lived for my growing up years.
Oh, Sigrid, you have a question?
Right. No, two remarks. First of all, I just found your picture, and it's actually Neuherrnhut on St. Thomas in the Caribbean, where your picture with the palm tree comes from.
I see.
But the other thing is, if somebody wants to still visit Groß St. Martin, Great St. Martin in Cologne, it's still there. They got completely bombed, but they rebuilt it. And so that picture that you showed of Cologne, if that church is definitely still there. Of those, I haven't can't remember which of the other churches are still there, but that one, and of course the cathedral, which of course there wasn't finished on that picture. Those two you would still see from across the Rhine if you look onto, and so you can still visit it, but probably not with all the nooks and crannies that he saw and that he disliked.
Yeah.
So, well, it was almost pretty much destroyed. So almost everything is new, apart from probably the bottom where you stand on. So
just a matter of interest, if I may point out that as part of my preparation for this talk, I wrote to the archivist of the Stadtbibliothek of every one of the cities mentioned in my talk, and asked them if there's any record or any documentation about the fact that Wesley had passed through there, and not one of them had a single line of documentation about his being in their city. So either they shut him out because he was so disrespectful or scornful of their towns and their population, that they didn't want to have anything to do with him, but they certainly got no record of him anyway.
Yes.
It was a fruitless search.
At the end of
he wasn't that famous in Germany at that time, probably. So it's just as if I was going to go to Great St. Martin's and make some remarks before the days of social media.
Yes. And you're very famous, Sigrid, now. Anyway, we're coming to a conclusion. Thank you very much, Dr. Hamnett, once again.
You're very welcome.
Certainly, I've rather changed my view of John Wesley as a result, especially what you told us about the abuse of his wife, really. So
whether he abused or just neglected her, I don't know, but which is a form of abuse, I do concede. But he certainly had at least wandering eyes when he was in America, because he was in all sorts of trouble there. He was arraigned before a magistrate.
On what charge? What charge did he go out before the magistrate? Molesting somebody?
I think it was. It might even have been the magistrate's daughter that he was after. I don't know.
Oh,
but you can you can fill that one up as far as your interest goes.
Yeah. And Imo says there's a very active Moravian commune in Rudigermine in Kent. Good. Well, thank you very much again. Now, in a month's time, in exactly a month, 4 weeks today, we have the March talk, which will be once more in St. George's, as well as online. And that also promises to be a fascinating talk on Osnabrück and the role that Osnabrück played in the years after the Second World War in restoration. The speaker who is coming to us is a former journalist, Alan Mitchell, whose parents met in Osnabrück after the war. His mother German, his father English, and so they met across the former divide as enemies in those two communities. And he has fascinating stories to tell about the meeting of his parents with both Field Marshal Montgomery and Adolf Hitler. So we await that next talk with bated breath. It's going to be fascinating. But for this evening, Dr. Hamnett, thank you very much once again for your most enlightening, revealing talk about John Wesley and his relationship with Lutheranism through Moravianism. Thank you all very much for coming this evening. Nice to see so many names on the screen, and I hope to see you perhaps live or online anyway at the next talk in a month's time.